beyond. I was now when I was a middle school student, I wanted to be a filmmaker. Actually, when I was a kid, I liked drawing, and then I saw the drawing was a very good way to express yourself. So I think the reason I wanted to be a filmmaker because I want to describe what I imagine and transform that image to something, closer to reality. So when people see it, they might believe that's gonna be the future. So I try to use drawing to convince people. So now I probably see architecture the similar way to describe what I imagine about the future. And I like travel. I like study different culture. So I think that's one of the reasons I like to practice in different region with a different cultural context, so that I can see how architecture can react to people from different place. So I think architecture is a good way to be think inside architecture. Also could be anything outside architecture. It's more instinct. It's more quick, right? It's more honest sometimes. It's like when you go somewhere, you want to what you say or what you express in the first reaction. I think that's important to catch that moment. I wanted to be a filmmaker at the beginning, and then I actually applied Film Academy, and the professor there recommended me to study architecture. I had no idea what's the architecture about, because at that time in Beijing, I don't see many modern buildings. I see traditional pavilions, temples. So I thought architects supposed to do the traditional architecture. I wasn't so interested, but I went to architecture anyway. And then I start to find, all different style and the different architects, different background. And I find architecture is professional with a lot of possibilities. And then I was interested to be architect. And after I graduated, I went to study at Yale, and then Zaha was my professor, and then she asked me to work in London. After 1 year, I thought I should start my practice, and then I started. Begin with a lot of competitions, and then until 2 years later, we won the first big commission in Canada. It's 2 towers. People call Marilyn Monroe towers. Yeah. And that was until that moment, we had no experience at all how to build a building. But that was an early project. I went to all my schools before my graduate study in Beijing. So I study architecture. And all this life experience all in Beijing. And after I went to the States for graduate study, and until I visit the States, I didn't know there's another different typology for cities, like, because I didn't travel much before that. So when you compare the different experience and urban forms, I start to realize my childhood in Beijing was quite unique, because the space and the layout, the cultural values behind the city forms. So I grew up in the very traditional part of the city, which is small valleys, single floor courtyard house, right in the center of the city. I feel live in the big city, also in the nature. So because there's artificial lakes and mountains in the very center of the Beijing. So I felt my childhood was like a playground, like I don't know, it's not a village, it's not a rural area, it's quite center, but you see mountains and lakes. And later on, I find those elements were artificial plant, which I don't find in Western cities, because I see natures, but they're more like void, like wild nature, like Central Parks, for example, in New York City. It's it's a master plan, but it's a big natural opposite to artificial. But in Beijing was quite different. Then I realized nature could be one strong device to bring peoples like all together, and could be part of the artificial city. So I didn't realize that before, but somehow in my early student works, I find now when I look back, I see my early student work has a lot of natural elements mixed with architecture. So maybe that's some influence, from my living experience in the city. I think nature and imaginary part of the nature was quite interesting to me, because like I mentioned before, the nature is not just the elements we find outside the cities. Those are nature, but that's not the nature I meant. I was more interested in imaginary scenes in the nature. Sometimes we find some natural scene very dramatic, very spiritual. But in some cases, human can create such environment. But in modern architecture time, we made architecture more like machines, like objects. They're more isolated from the nature. But I'd like to use nature as a tool to create this dramatic atmosphere that you normally don't find in modern cities. I think I was a little inspired from traditional gardens. In the Eastern architecture, you'll find a Japanese garden, Chinese garden. They use artificial nature as a tool to create some scenery that you don't find in real nature, but more like dramatic setting for people to experience, to start their imagination in such space. I find that interests me quite a lot. Maybe that's the reason sometimes I mention the Eastern traditional culture, because I find there's a connection. And I think in the future, if we believe that the city and architecture can be more closer to the human emotion, we could maybe study some traditional way, how in ancient time, how people put the spiritual quality of architecture into the as a core value. Architecture, it's always fun. I mean, I don't care how much it takes from me. You just want to enjoy it, enjoy meeting people, visit different place, enjoy, fighting for your dream. Enjoy, of course, at the last you accomplish, you finish your building and wandering in the space that you imagine 1,000 times, and then compared to other great architects' work, and then that's something really really paid back. I think that time, time is you always want to give more time, and then that's something you have to compromise. I just curious about things not happened yet. I'm curious what can happen that I never imagined. So sometimes it could be more like accident, like I didn't prepare, but it happened. It happens. So I like that. I think it's like a life. Like sometimes you're full of imagination. You think you need an opportunity to express yourself, but the time is not there yet. So you, it's not happening. But sometimes the dramatic thing happened. So I don't plan. I don't plan much. The empty roof is a waste. So especially like the project you mentioned, the kindergarten, that's a single floor architecture. So it's very easy to use the roof for children. They need a playground, so the roof become ideal for that. But sometimes we treat the architecture as a landscape, mountains, slopes, and slope can be also accessible. I think that's a fun sometimes. In China, we have a saying that the naughty kids, they like to climb to the roof. Maybe naughty kids, maybe that behavior means freedom. You give more freedom to people. They can access a building anywhere. Architecture is not a barrier. It's not just a way to limit the space, define different place. Maybe that's give up more possibilities. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think I don't know. I chose them become my tutor because they were doing daring architecture. I thought they're critical, also full of imagination and very brave. I think that period, we call them architectural heroes. I like that time that people like to do daring things. I like that. Maybe that was the reason I was interested in architecture, because I see it as a ideal way to express yourself. Yeah. Then now I feel differently. I find architecture can help people, the users, to also express themselves. It's not just for architect. The architect, for example, Antonio Gaudi, Barcelona, right? There's a city full of his work, and he's expressed himself through architecture, but now it's become asset of the city, and people like to visit and explore. And I think a lot of people was inspired by architecture, and then they start to also daring to imagine more. I think public buildings can do that. I think that's really encourage us, as architects to communicate with the public through architecture. I think matchboxes, and we call the concrete forest. That's been a problem for a long time already, and people don't like it. But how we build a better, different world? We have to think, how architecture can escape from that value, which is they built more purely for capitalism and power sometimes, and not enough considering about humans' emotion and the spirit. So that's what I meant, probably. I want to do buildings with atmosphere, the dramatic, futuristic, those things you mentioned, those keywords, it's something I think lacking in our reality. Like people don't find in our daily life. The city architecture and our life become too practical. Sometimes it needs this energy. So that was the maybe explain why I want to do something different. I think architecture is all about the humanity, but it's not limited to technology. It's just a small portion of it, because if you look at the architecture history, in every period, it's full of dreams. It's the people that put all their emotions into the built world. But in different time, people build different things. But you could feel the energy, the imagination, the spirit of different time through built world, through the architecture. So I hope we can do the same. Technology is always a limitation. It's in different time. It's always, you always need it. You always need technology. You always need a material. But I don't think that's a core of humanity, because I feel humanity should be something people can really feel, emotional. Sometimes the material can help with it. Sometimes the atmosphere, the space, the location, can do the same. Talking about the sustainability, I think is another reason probably that architecture cannot only build up based on the technology, because technology is something will go away, or will be updated very soon. If you see architecture as a form of a product, the product will be eliminated very, very quick. Let's imagine the solar panels, for example. It's probably will be no solar panels in 2 decades. Maybe it's I don't know. Many architecture lost their real quality and become pure technology product. That's something I worry about. We should rethink about our relationship with the nature. We're not protected in the machine. Probably architecture should help people to be closer to the nature, to feel more about nature. Probably we are part of the nature. Yeah, maybe that's a different way to approach architecture. That's a little closer to my original dream, right? I become filmmaker. You just draw something impossible, and people see it, and they believe it. Yes, we got a lot of invitations to do that, but I still see the metaverse. The meaning of it is to how this creation can impact the reality, because that's become parallel world, and people think that's a virtual world, that's a ideal world, and the reality is full of problems and full of limitations. Those are not affect each other. But when we spend more time in the metaverse, and if the metaverse is full of imaginary and ideal works, eventually we'll believe more, and we'll experience more in metaverse, and then we will ask, why don't we do it in our real world? So maybe that's a good tool to help us to experience that first, and bring the future closer to us in the real world. So I see that as a potential. I don't know. I don't know. I could do all of them, because as an architect, you should know, you always have deadline, right? You always want to change and develop. Of course, after years, you want to do something different. But as I mentioned, it's an art that with a time limit, and that's a one period of your career and history, and I think it's a beautiful to accept everything about it, not keep questioning. The question belongs the future. We should always question about what we do next. I don't know. I don't think that way. Sometimes, I mean, it doesn't mean I don't like other people's building. I like them, but I don't think that way. No, I probably will think if I got opportunity, I would do some things differently. I really like Louis Kahn and Antonio Gaudi. I don't know, they're so different, but I don't know why I like them both. I like Sajima-san from Japan, Sauna. Mies van der Rohe, I like Oscar Niemeyer. I like many. I don't know. I think the future city, I'd like to see, of course, the creations should be new. They should look differently. And then, of course, we'll have a lot of heritage, the traditional part of the city. So I like to see this contrast become more and more because that's probably the nature for the time, when the different layers, more and more layers stacking together, you will see more diversity. And the future means the layers will be much more. And then we'll be out of this struggling, how the old and new should coexist, because that's naturally will happen because you will have a more newer compared to what's already existed. So new things, of course. I always looking for the opportunity that I can looking into myself more and express the imagination. So I feel that the world now is full of these boundaries, and we should probably intentionally cross that boundary and to create something new and something that we never imagined before. So I need that opportunity, because architect, you cannot just draw and build. You need a ideal case. So I'm really looking forward to find that opportunity. George Lucas Museum was one example. I really feel that was a very good opportunity for me, and the project gave a lot of space to create. Yeah, things like this, I really. It doesn't matter how big or small, what's the nature of the project. It just need the space you can imagine.